Hello, welcome back. It is France here, and this is the third part of the book discussion for Simplicity Parenting by Kim John Payne. So if you missed the other sessions, you can go back and see the other ones as well. I also want to add here that I have decided to add at the end of kind of the book discussion, I'm going to add my take from this, and I'm also going to add a personal experience. So either a personal experience of how I've seen the direct implications of not having a simple life, or the direct implications of having a simple life and the benefits that it has caused myself or my family or clients of mine. Okay, so last week we finished off with complex PTSD, and we're going to pick up right from here. So complex PTSD is also interchangeable with CRS, which means cumulative stress reaction. So CRS describes a reaction to a pattern of constant small stresses. So it's stresses that build up but rarely dissipate. This doesn't refer to the level of stress that is, in fact, just a normal fact of life. Because stress exists in a child's life, and it's just part of being a child. It's part of being human. They experience frustrated desires, illnesses, sorrows, and losses. The level of stress described by the term CRS in its frequency is very different from the stresses that occur regularly and normally in a child's everyday life. So what type of stress is damaging? Stress that is too large or too constant to move beyond. If our abilities or our child's abilities can't match it, then he or she can't understand it or work through it, and they become stuck in a recurring cycle of stress reactions. This is extremely, extremely fascinating to me because I've had an experience with my child this week about this. So I'm going to share that with you at the end, so stay tuned. CRS is characterized not by the severity of a traumatic event, but rather by the consistency or frequency of small stresses. What I came to understand was that little stresses collectively drag on a child's ability to be resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically. To me, this is extremely, extremely, extremely powerful, okay? So little stresses collectively drag on a child's ability to be resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically. They interfere with concentration, with an emotional baseline of calm, with a sense of security that allows for novelty and change. They interfere with focus, not just for the item or task at hand. These stresses distract from the focus or task of childhood itself, which is an emerging and developing sense of self. That is what childhood is all about, right? What has also become increasingly clear to me is that so much of this stress is what we now call daily life. A daily life submerged in the same media-rich, multitasking, complex, information overload, time-pressured waters as our own. So quite simply, the pace of our daily lives is increasingly misaligned with the pace of childhood. I don't believe the attack is a result of conscious effort. As a society, however, we've signed on wholeheartedly to the notion that more, bigger, newer, faster, they all mean better. We cram more and more into our homes. We even build them bigger and into our lives while we're suffering from busyness and lack of sleep and our awareness, right? So we always have, 24 hours CNN, blogs, iPhones, constant online updates, everything around us, right? More, and we just cram it in. This book was written in 2009, and it says in here that an American kid started using mainstream technology gadgets such as cell phones, MP3 players, and DVD players, which obviously is very different from what we have now, but they started using them at the age of 6.7 years old in 2009. If you had to guess what the statistic is in 2020, what would you guess? Sadly, I think my guess would be before age 1. And to me, that is extremely scary. the other part of this that is scary for me is that we don't know the long-term effects of this, right? So when it comes to parenting and when I need to make major and minor decisions for my daughter and for myself, I always love to consider and to look at the long-term effects of things, right? So we know how we kind of turned out, how generations before us turned out without using all this technology. My generation probably started using it around teenage years. But what do you think the effects of introducing mainstream technology to our kids at such a young age would be, right? So it really makes you wonder why it is the way it is, right? Okay, sorry, enough of this digression. So let's move on to sleep. So she gives an amazing example here, and I think I loved it so much because I protect my child's sleep like it is the most important thing. I think it's the top thing that I probably protect, to be quite honest with you. But to look at our society's assault on childhood, another way is to look at a sleep analogy, right? So most of us have the knowledge that we all need a good chunk of sleep, probably 7 to 8 hours a night, right? Yet many of us would love to be able to function very well on significantly less. Some feel that they can manage well on 4 hours a night. Thomas Root here, a researcher, says that the percentage of the population who needs less than 5 hours of sleep per night, rounded to a whole number, is 0. Okay? 0. There was a physician who consulted a cognitive neuroscientist specializing in sleep research, and the physician asked if he knew of any reason not to prescribe a new wakefulness promoting drug to an undergraduate student during exam time. And the answer from this neuroscientist was no reason at all not to, unless you think sleep does something. Does sleep do something besides mark the time between wakefulness? Does childhood do something other than mark the time until adulthood? We would die without sleep, which should render the question that most scientists are arguing over, most scientists are arguing over which processes occur exclusively during sleep, and mental and emotional clarification and improvement of motor skills. So it's kind of like a mental practicing of movements takes place while we sleep. And some feel sleep helps maintain homeostasis in the brain. The immune system doesn't work properly without sleep, and we know that lack of sleep impairs speech, memory, and innovative, flexible thinking. Okay. Scientists are learning the biological purpose of sleep by studying what happens when we're deprived of it. Sleep-deprived people are much less likely to retain and use what they learn while awake. They lose resiliency, mentally and physically, as their immune system falters. Still, we wonder, can we skip it? Can we do without it? Or shortchange it in some way to reclaim the third of our lives that we lost to slumber? As a society, we seem to be asking the same questions about childhood. What purpose does it serve? Can we speed it up? Can we better prepare our children for adulthood by treating them more like adults? I worry that we'll understand the purpose of childhood by seeing increasingly what people are like when they've been rushed through theirs. And I don't think that it'll be a pretty picture. Childhood has its own mysterious processes, its own pace. When we ask children to keep up with a speeded up world, I believe we are unconsciously doing them harm. We are depriving them of exactly what they need to make their way in an increasingly complex world, well-being and resiliency. Okay? And yet, I sincerely believe that there are many things we do as parents to buffer and protect our children's childhood. There's many things that we can do as parents to buffer and protect our children's childhood. So quite simply, a protected childhood allows for the slow development of identity, well-being, and resiliency. And I think those are all things that as parents we want. We want our child to be resilient emotionally, physically, mentally. We want them, well-being for them. We want them to have their own sense of identity, of knowing who they are, what they want, what they like, and not letting other people push them over or abuse them, right? But yet we feel like we need to rush them through childhood, right? So this is where the beauty of simplicity parenting steps in, right? So what I took from this is that stress is in every child's life, and that's normal. But the, complex PTSD or the CRS or CSR, whichever the acronym is, it is what is damaging for kids, right? So when I look at this, the first thing that I think about is the stress of parents that are going through a separation or divorce is usually always higher, and this triggers down directly to the children, right? So, and from personal experience and from experience from friends and from clients, it is definitely falls, the stress of a separation falls into that description of, complex PTSD or CRS, meaning that it is small stresses that happen over usually, unfortunately, a long period of time. So a number of, I would say months, but I feel like for most people it's a number of years that these stresses happen, and it affects our children, right? So even if you're not separated, maybe you and your partner are having lots of arguments, or there's lots of tension in the household, or you're stressed out at work and you're taking it home with you, we need to realize that this directly impacts our kids. And there has been multiple studies that prove that the stress of parents is affecting our children directly in the short term and in the long term. And it affects things like learning challenges, behavior issues, and health. And like she said in this book here, these little stresses collectively drag on a child's ability to be resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically, okay? So what can we do to alleviate some stress in our lives, right? I believe the answer is self-care, and true self-care, not just simple distractions like drinking a glass of wine at the end of the day or binging Netflix just to forget the world outside and then go feel right back the same level of stress the next day or as soon as we're done with these distractions, right? So how are you currently taking care of yourself spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally? So many other ways to take care of yourself. And I don't want to digress too much into this, but it is something that I have discussed in length in one of my private Facebook groups. So you can send me a direct message if you want to know, more about this. You're like, I'm so stressed, whatever, if you're going through a separation, a divorce, or if you're just having issues at home or whatever the issue may be. And if you just want some help, feel free to reach out to me personally. I can, we can have a private conversation, or I can add you to this group and I can tag you in the posts that talk about self-care. All right, another key point that I got here was sleep. And like I mentioned before, sleep is something that I protect for my child heavily. And even though I don't think that it was the point in the book to try to make us protect our children's sleep, but I think she was mainly using it as an example, but I think it is extremely, extremely important to protect our child, their sleep. So for me personally, it takes something really, really special to deviate from my daughter's bedtime. Okay. So I'm going to give you a couple examples here, and they may be different for you, but our kids, your child is playing outside with their friends or their cousins or their family, and should you interrupt them because it's bedtime? You can answer that, yes or no. That is your answer. But with the information that I shared with you just a few minutes ago, it might make you rethink your answer. Do you keep your child up late because you don't want to change your lifestyle? So do you want to go out with friends, or you want to go out for a late dinner, or do you want to keep traveling? So it's affecting your child's sleep. is that harmful to your child in the short term and the long term? I believe, and it's not just a personal belief, it I think shows directly in many of the other research that I have done, that the answer is yes, it does impact your child's short-term and long-term health. Or another example is it's July 1st and they're doing fireworks at 11 p.m. and your child's bedtime is 8 p.m. Should you keep them up? Obviously, this depends on the child's age. This depends on your child. Some people, need 12 hours of sleep. Some need 10 hours of sleep. Some, if you put them to bed, doesn't matter what time, they're still going to get their 10 hours of sleep. Some, even if you postpone or delay their bedtime, they're going to wake up at the same time. So therefore, missing out on 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 hours of sleep, So, but it is, again, my belief that a 4-year-old doesn't need to see fireworks, and it will cost them many of the health benefits or effects that I mentioned a few minutes ago, but mainly it would lower their immune system, right? And we've all been in the hands of grumpy kids the next day because of lack of sleep, and in my opinion, it is just not worth it. And the other thing too is that, not only does this lack of sleep from looking at these fireworks for 3 minutes has affected their immune system, weakened it, but they're most likely going to consume sugar, and we know that sugar weakens your immune system. So it's like a double whammy here for your child. So like I said, these will be different for everyone, but my point is, are you doing yourself and your child a disservice by limiting their sleep? I think so. There's obviously special occasions here and there, but how often are those special occasions, right? And are we doing them a disservice by leading extremely busy lives and asking them to keep up? Again, my answer is yes. And I think we're going to continue to explore more of this as we continue to dive deep into this book. So before I let you go today, I just want to share with you my personal experience. So the one I'm going to share with you today falls on stress. So I'm going to repeat again part of what she said in the book here, and my experience falls directly in line with the fact that little stresses collectively drag on a child's ability to be resilient mentally, emotionally, and physically. So last week, my child experienced to me, I would say it was a little stress in her life, but wow, the emotional and mental distress that she received from this stress was crazy. And it lasted guaranteed 6 days, from being extremely emotionally and mentally distressed, but also you could just see the anger that was kept inside of her, and the aggressive behavior that she showed was just wild to see that this, what I see as a little stress affected her so deeply. Could this stress have been avoided? Yes. Did I do everything I could and knew how to help her process it? Yes. Did I make every effort to connect with her? Yes. And still, she was having a hard time with it all. So now I'm regrouping and seeing what else I can do. And I'm going to teach her the skills that she needs to help her release it, and also to help her deal with an issue like that if it were to happen again, right? But as I was preparing the notes today, I realized how true this was, and how that little stresses that our kids experience in their lives affects them mentally, emotionally, physically. It causes behavior issues and learning difficulties. And I saw it firsthand. I mean, I've obviously seen other things before, but I never really directly related it to little stresses that she has experienced. So it was really interesting to kind of put 2 and 2 together today when I was reading the notes to put this together. So I encourage you to look at your life and your family's life and see if something can be simplified. How can you alleviate some stress? Continue to listen to these to find out more. We will reconnect again next week. And if you want to continue the conversation, check out the links below in the description. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. If you need to reach out personally, please feel free to do so. Have a great week.